What's up, everybody? My name is Tucker. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the New York Knicks. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like rating on it. Check out my socials in the description as well. And let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so last year for the Knicks was super fun. They were back in the playoffs. They had home court advantage in the first round. Madison Square Garden was rocking for those playoff games. It was, oh my God, it was so fun at the beginning of the postseason last year because we finally started to get a ton of fans back in the building. And seriously, like I know that a lot of people think that I'm biased against certain teams, but I really do want the Knicks to be good. I think the league is it's just more fun when the Knicks are good, when they're interesting, when they're relevant. And so last year was super cool. And then in that offseason following, they really kind of doubled down on the roster that brought them that top 4 seed in the East last year. They re-signed Randle, Rose, Burks, Noel. They signed Evan Fournier and Kemba Walker. They spent a ton of money with guys like RJ Barrett and Mitchell Robinson needing some contract extensions here coming up as well. So really, to me, what that meant was, apart from trades and the obvious, maneuvering you can make, especially when you're the Knicks, was that the Knicks were really locking in this roster. It was going to be Barrett and Robinson. It's going to be the guys that they re-signed. And for at least the next 2 to 3 years, that was going to be their group pending any trades or anything like that. Because from a free agency standpoint, they just really weren't going to have a ton of leeway or a ton of flexibility. And most of that is tied to the big extension for Julius Randle. Now, the problem with all that is once you lock in, you need the team to play well. And to begin this season, they have not been playing well at all for a variety of different reasons that we'll get into throughout this video. But from a record standpoint, I'm sure most Knicks fans thought that they would be better to begin this year, and just their expectation level, of course, skyrocketed after hosting a playoff series last year. One thing I will mention, though, about that team last year, which we'll kind of get into throughout the video, but in my head, it's like, oh yeah, they hosted a first round playoff series, but that 4 through 7 seed last year, there's like a couple of game difference between each of those teams. So they very easily could have been like the 7 seed last year, but obviously being able to host the playoff series and things like that was really fun for them. But it's not like they were 10 games above everybody else with the 4 seed. But with that mentioned, let's talk about what's been happening for the Knicks to begin this season. The record's fine. They're right around 500, but they really don't look the same to me. Offensively, they've actually been pretty good. In some ways, they've been better than they were last year. You would expect some improvement bringing in perimeter creation guys like Fournier, having Derrick Rose for the entire season because they traded for him midway through last year. And most of the good things they're doing offensively is just tied to they're shooting the ball really well from 3. They're top 10 in attempts. They're top 6 in percentage. And that's obviously going to be a huge deal and really power good offense. But defensively, they have struggled. And this was, if you were someone that was making the case that the Knicks were going to regress this season from a record standpoint, the defense was going to be the thing that you pointed to, because Thibodeau has this great defensive reputation. And last year, a lot of the Knicks regular season wins came down to they're just going to care more. They're going to play harder. They're going to really guard. They're going to crash the offensive glass. And, they're going to do what those Bulls teams used to do with Thibodeau as well. They're just going to play harder than you in these regular season games. But then defensively, obviously they were a very good defensive team, but the one number that everybody pointed out was opponent 3-point percentage, because amongst any metric you can find defensively, defense is still a very difficult thing to quantify. But among all the defensive metrics you can find, the one with the most variability that also really impacts the success of a team defensively is opponent 3-point percentage, because you can do everything wrong in a defensive possession and give a great shooter a wide open 3 and they can just miss it. Now, I'm not saying that's what was happening with New York all of last season. However, they were the best team in the league last year in terms of opponent 3-point percentage. And we thought halfway through the year last year that at some point that would move, that would change. And it never did. To begin this season, they're bottom 10 in that statistic. They're 20th in opponent 3-point percentage. And that is largely the reason why they're a bottom half team in the league in terms of defensive rating to begin this season. It's not the entire reason. Part of it is they're playing some more offensive guys to try and make their offense better, guys like Fournier and Kemba that are not very good defenders compared to some of the guys that they were playing last year that were basically zeros offensively, but were very good defensively. And that's probably the biggest reason why the Knicks don't have as good of a record as you would hope for them to. It is a little bit odd to see them as a top half of the league offensive team and a bottom half of the league defensive team. Now, it's not the end of the world. It is just one metric. It is just one statistic, and it does not mean that the Knicks are going to be awful this year, but it does bring in this conversation of, was it a mistake? Did they Did they go all in too early on this group? Because they did have options. Now, the contract extensions they handed out to guys like Rose and Burks and Noel weren't super prohibitive. They're like 2 or 3 year deals. It's not like they're making 20 a year. Really, the big one is the Julius Randle one. And he's been fine this year. He hasn't been like all NBA level good like he was last year. But they're really depending on him to, worst case, be like a solid trade piece, and best case be an all-star and all-NBA caliber guy. And he's been good. Nothing totally wrong with the way he's played this year. He, along with a lot of other guys, are really trying to adjust to, the way that the game is being called and foul calls and things like that. He, just like every other 20-plus point per game scorer in the league, relies on getting to the free throw line, and they're trying to adjust to that. He's not shooting as well on pull-ups. The mid-range stuff is not working as well. I'm sure he'll be fine. I'm sure he'll figure it out. But I'm sure there are Knicks fans out there that are a little bit nervous, thinking, man, like last year was super fun, but did we need to go all in like this? Did we need to sign Fournier to $20+ million? Did we need to give Julius Randle this huge near max extension? Because this is going to be their group for the next couple of seasons. Now, ultimately, here's where I land with New York. Did they lock themselves into this group maybe a bit too early? Yeah, probably. But it was almost something that they had to do, because if this was a team that if this was the Warriors that had a history of success over the last 10 years, then yeah, maybe it's a little bit easier to say, hey, this was a nice, fun season, but we're not going to bring a ton of these guys back and spend a ton of money just to recreate a top 4 seed in the Eastern Conference. But it's the Knicks, and they needed positive momentum. They had so many things going for them. Even before they were good last year, they clearly had things together in the front office. You could see some signs of hope from the head coaching position. They had some decent young players. And then last year validated all those things. And for a team like the Knicks, that so much of their success as a franchise is tied to their name and who they are and the public perception of what the Knicks are, that they really did need to continue that momentum. And if they had, for example, not re-signed Randle, potentially traded him, let him walk the following offseason, whatever the case may be, and go back to being a 20-win team, that just completely ruins and erases the huge amount of progress that they did make last year by making the postseason. So ultimately, the question is, did the Knicks make a mistake? I don't believe so. Even if they're the 7th seed in the East this year, I still believe they're a playoff team. Even if they're a play-in team this year, I still think that validates the moves that they made. Now, is Fournier overpaid? Yeah. Is Randle in the long term probably going to be overpaid? Potentially. But if you're the Knicks and you finally have a good season, you have to capitalize on that, because as we've seen over the last couple of years, even when it seems like you're locked in, even when it seems like, man, I don't know what we're going to do with Russell Westbrook. I don't know how we're going to trade Chris Paul. I don't know what we're going to do with this player, that player. Every single time, the player or the team, they find a way to make it work, whether it be with a buyout, whether it be with a trade, whether it be with a team that is desperate enough to trade for a guy that's making more money than he should be making. Every single step of the way, you're able to make things work. So if down the road there's an opportunity for the Knicks to make a trade for a star or sign a guy in free agency and they really need to make the space, they'll find a way to get rid of Evan Fournier if they need to. They'll find a way to convince a team to take on Julius Randle as part of a trade. They'll do whatever they can to make sure that RJ Barrett looks like a promising trade asset down the road. And ultimately, they're probably going to be better moving forward this season than they have been to begin the year. The 3-point percentage stuff, I'm sure they'll figure it out. They're still competing. They're still playing hard. They still are a good defensive team. It's just not following through right now in the results. So ultimately, I'm not concerned about the Knicks in the long term. I do think that there were some overpays from them this season, or this offseason, but as it relates to like, should they have done that? Did they need to do that? Is absolutely no question in my mind that even if they're not as good of a team this year, because that was my main takeaway for the Knicks, was I'm cool with most of the things they did this offseason in terms of like the long-term plan, and they'll get out of it if they need to. But they're probably not going to be as good this year as they were last year, just strictly from like a standing standpoint. They might be, they might have a similar winning percentage. They might finish similarly in terms of offensive, defensive rating, but I found it unlikely they were going to be a top 4 team when you've got teams like Brooklyn, Miami that got better, Chicago that got better. We don't know what's going to happen with Philly, Boston, Milwaukee, Indiana, Atlanta. The East is really, really deep. And it's likely that them and a lot of other teams are going to have these kind of middling records. And maybe they do the same thing they did last year. They have a strong push at the end of the year. They end up with the 4 seed. But ultimately, they're probably like a 7th or worse seed team but that's completely fine. I don't think that it necessarily means that they made this gigantic mistake by bringing back these guys in the offseason. Despite some potential overpays there, contextually and situationally, I think it still made total sense for the Knicks to do what they did, even if you kind of have to do it with the understanding they might not be as good this year. It might be better offensively, but the defensive stuff and consistency from last year might not 100% carry over. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, be sure to check out the box on screen, check out the socials, check out my socials in the description as well, the Linktree link down in the description below. With all those things said, hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.